property in Tompkins County that did have to buy that, and I believe the coverage was $240,000 for that endorsement.
So my insurance company is just making it clear.
Yeah, I mean, and let's distinguish between a leak in your refrigerator, which is a controlled substance, and a massive spill of some sort on your land. There are some things that are going to be covered because they're normal but if you decide that you want to empty all your gas tanks for the winter and you decide to put them in your roadside ditch and the DEC decides you're going to have to clean that up, you're not going to be insured for that. Likewise, if a nearby process or a neighbor pollutes on your land, you'll have a claim against them, but your insurance company isn't going to pay the cleanup or monitoring costs for that process under the navigation law, which is a DEC process when you're dealing with oil and gas. So everyone's in that boat, and
so none of us have insurance.
I would be extremely surprised if anyone in here had a homeowners or renters policy that said, we cover you for environmental spills and claims. They really don't exist anymore in the marketplace.
Herb Cooley, beautiful downtown Beechburg. Two things. One, I'd like somebody to give us just a short history on the birth of this moratorium and how it came to be, when it was started, you did all the paperwork and all that stuff. That's the short question. And the second one was a little follow-up to Frank concerning the possible decrease in town value. I would say conversely, if that's a concern, we would have seen an increase in town value because of all the leases that are out there, and we would have had a bunch of landowners screaming because their taxes went up just because they signed a lease. And I don't think we've seen that. So I guess if the county is not going to tax property based on the perceived value of having a lease, then I don't think that we should worry about the value of the property going down because the lease is held in abeyance for a year.
So I'll start with the second question because that's kind of a follow-up on Frank's. The county assessment is actually, it's countywide assessment for all of us. So every other county except for ours in Nassau County has individual town assessors. So the county does the assessment, but they do not, it's not added to your assessment because you have a lease. So there's no, you don't, that's why, as you recognize, no one's seeing an effect on their assessment. And that's the reason why. And the question then about how this all came about, I have to say that I'm the one that started all this, recognizing the results of the election and polling the town board members, that there was a desire to work on these issues. And I consulted with the town's attorney and I said, what's the best way to go about this? He told me, as I mentioned earlier, that a moratorium is the best way to go about it. And I said, so do you have any recommended, templates that I could go to? And I went to the Association of Towns as well. And the Association of Towns gave me about a half a dozen and told me the infirmities and the strengths of each. So it's going to take a bit of time to put all that together. And our attorney said there's also a firm in town that's been working on this for many municipalities. It's the Community Environmental Defense Council, I believe is the name of it. He has worked with them on these moratorium laws in other communities and said they have a very good working knowledge. They'll do the work for free. They'll save you money. And so I contacted them. They did put a draft together, which they showed Guy and myself. And we gave many comments back and forth to them, which they worked on. And then once they had it put together and answering all our questions, then it went to our attorney who looked at it, said this seems to be complete and you should take it to the community whenever you're ready. And that's how it came to be.
Will Lawrence from Brookendale. I sort of have a comment more than a question. Maybe the question is, would this be outside the scope of what the town would consider? But I think the mortgage market is changing really fast. And I know I'm in the middle of refinancing, and one of the very first questions I was asked by Tompkins Trust was, is there any kind of gas lease or mineral lease on your land? And I was able to say, oh, no, not at all. but it does give me pause to wonder, what if I did have one? What would they have done? And I suspect that if there is something going on or about to happen with mortgages for landowners, I don't think it would show up in the assessments for a couple of years. And it might not show up when you're looking at other places, other states. So that's my comment, and the question is, I don't know, is that outside the scope or in the scope?
I'll at least start with an answer, because your question on mortgages is interesting, and you didn't have to say what bank it was, I already knew. So, and that's not a slight. There are some banks that are hesitant and reluctant to lend when there's a gas lease, and there are some banks that don't see it as an issue. It depends on what bank you're dealing with. There are a number of banks that will accept an oil and gas lease if it has certain provisions in it, or if the oil and gas company will surrender the surface rights. In other words, you can go underneath the land without going down the surface. Or if the oil and gas company will simply agree, or the lease contains a clause that agrees that it is subordinate to the lender's mortgage. So there's a lot of variations on that theme. The big problem in the mortgage market is that you have state regulators, then you have these quasi-governmental state regulators, then you've got federal regulators, and you've got all these, Fannie and Freddie, which are sort of governmental agencies, sort of not. Then you have the title insurance market, the banking market, and then you have the DEC and the EPA, and you have one saying 200 feet away from the primary dwellings is okay, but okay, well, we'll do 500 feet, and they haven't come to an agreement yet, and it's created some uncertainty. So if you have an oil and gas lease, yes, it may impact your ability for a buyer to get a mortgage. They may not be able to go to their bank of choice, and it may require that you as a seller, in order to sell the land, get your lease surrendered, or have the company surrender their surface rights, or whatever it is that the buyer or the bank may want. There's no guarantee you can get that, but I know in 4 attempts to get the oil and gas company to surrender surface rights so property could be sold, 3 times they just agreed to do it. I think it was largely dependent upon whether or not they had actual plans to drill in that area, whether they had spent the money on trying to build a unit map or anything like that. That may be the real reason why they said, no problem or a problem. But there are issues that some banks deal with that they just will not lend if there's an oil and gas lease. There are other banks that will. So yeah, buyers and sellers are going to have to be a little more flexible than they're used to, and you may not be able to go to the bank with the lowest rate because they have the tightest lending procedures. Some banks want tight pants, 2 belts, and 3 suspenders, and others are willing to say this is not really going to affect my mortgage lien. It's up to their underwriters.
Is it follow-up?
Yeah, it's follow-up. Okay. Let me just add that I did buy the land in 2007, so not so long ago, and that question was not asked at that time. I'm not sure what time frame you're speaking from when you're giving me this background, but I suspect that it's just the past couple of years?
That's about right. The past, I'd say in the past 3 years, this has become a recognized issue. And it sort of dovetails, obviously, for whatever reason, a particular group of underwriters or a particular board of directors of a given lending institution have determined that there are some actuarially demonstrable risks to their money on the marketplace if there's an oil and gas lease, because let's say hypothetically the land may not be able to sell for what it was once valued at if there's a well next to the house, something like that. That really turns on the decision of the individual bank and what level of risk they're willing to assume. The issue really has only come to real light in the past 3 years. And insofar as property values, I'm not sure. I mean, I understand from a risk analysis perspective why a bank might or might not lend in a given situation. But if we were going to see impacts on land values based on the inability to capture whatever gas might or might not exist under that land, I think we might have seen some statewide impacts in the past 4 years, and I'm not sure that's happened. So it may be that nobody knows until something goes into production. I don't know.
Don has an answer too, and
It's just an embellishment.
an embellishment, okay.
So, I know this bank, they actually said in many meetings with the head of the lending, and the reason why they asked you that question is they were going to increase the cost of your, their bank charges, because they'll have to go into negotiations with the gas companies, so that's the reason they asked the question. And then that will also be a contingency that they will tell you that it's depending on the outcome of that negotiation. The other thing that's available is they will tell you that they can lend to you, make you a commercial loan, which has a much higher interest rate, but that's another thing that they can do. But they will tell you that's the other option if they can't make it. The other question you asked is about assessment, and it's my understanding that until your land has producing gas or has any construction on it, that the property value is strictly market based. So it's based on what someone will pay you for your land, and it could be up or down for what it's been assessed at right now, depending on people's perception of the gas industry and your lease. So the assessment office is not going to assess anything based on gas expectations, only on what the market says. Whenever a gas well is actually sited, then there are specific guidelines by the state that talk about the structure as well as the gas that's produced, and that is paid by the leased gas company. That's who pays that tax as opposed to the property owner. Okay? So we should not, and this goes to Frank's question, unless there's a lot of people out there that in this community that have decided they really want to invest in land because it has a gas lease, or people who have decided that they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because it has a gas lease, they're probably not going to see anything on the assessment office. It's going to be a mix. Some people will decide and really want to play much of an effect. So that's a good question, and we'll just keep the community up to date and ask the assessment office to do the same. They're just looking at data. They're not predicting, they're only just looking at data.
Okay, I've seen a couple of hands go up, Bill Crispell and Tony. So I really want to check in now. It is 7 minutes after 9. And that was 3 questions, and it took us about 17 minutes to handle. So we have 2 more questions. I think looks like some people want to go. So why don't we take a little pause, and those of you who want to leave can leave. And those of you who want to stay to the bitter end. Actually, before people go, let me just let you know that there will be some next steps. Don, why don't we just, I'm sorry, you guys. Hold on for just a second. Don, can you speak briefly to what next steps will be for the board about this? And then you can leave.
You can still leave it.
You can leave, actually. You might want to hear this.
That's right. Contrary to signs around the town, the supervisor does not make his own rules. So I will say that there's been 2 things that I picked up from tonight's discussion that the board needs to give serious consideration with the law that we have right now. One is the gas extraction definition and the implication of that definition. The other is the timing of enactment. So those things the board needs to sit down and work on before we have something to bring forward. There may be other things, but I know I've identified at least 2 that we should spend time on, which we will do at our next board meeting, which is 6 days from now. And so we'll work on that. And once we have listened to your points, and you can feel free to email us or write us or call us or whatever with your other comments, so we can work through this and come up with the best law to bring forward to the public. And then there will be, most likely, unless the board decides not to go ahead with this, a public hearing. There'll be plenty of announcements about that. Hopefully the discussion you have with Irene about the way so many...
She'll have to wait until she wants to stop by.
Okay, well maybe she can stop by, for sure. Anyway, so that'll be the process that we're going through.